Whispers followed Catherine Hayes from the moment she stepped into the intensive care unit. No one commented on her intelligence. No one mentioned her years of trauma experience or her calm efficiency under pressure. They only noticed the scars. The harsh fluorescent lights of Johns Hopkins Hospital revealed every ridge of damaged skin without mercy. Thick burn scars crept from beneath Catherine's left ear, winding down her neck before disappearing beneath the collar of her navy blue scrubs. Her left forearm was covered in smooth grafted skin, interrupted by a jagged depression that looked unmistakably like an old shrapnel wound. Smaller scars disappeared beneath her sleeves and climbed toward her wrists, each one hinting at injuries far beyond an ordinary accident. To many of the image-conscious staff, she looked less like a trauma nurse and more like someone who belonged in one of the ICU beds. Catherine ignored the stares. She was 32 years old, exceptionally skilled, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years making impossible decisions. Every movement was precise. Every chart was flawless. Every patient received her complete attention. None of that mattered. "I'm just saying it's unsettling," Jessica Reynolds whispered one morning in the staff lounge, stirring her latte without looking away from the doorway. Jessica, the ICU charge nurse, looked immaculate even halfway through a 12-hour shift. Her makeup never smudged. Her blonde hair never escaped its perfect curls, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being admired. "Patients wake up terrified after surgery," she continued. "The last thing they need is someone with all that standing over them." Brenda, a younger nurse who rarely formed an opinion before checking Jessica's first, laughed quietly. "Did you see the guy in bed 6? He actually flinched when Catherine changed his 4. Jessica smirked. "I heard Dr. Abbott wants her moved permanently to nights. Fewer visitors, less patient interaction." Outside the break room, Catherine stood motionless with a stack of patient charts tucked beneath one arm. She heard every word. Only the slightest tightening along her scarred jaw betrayed any emotion. Compared to everything she had survived, cruel gossip barely registered. She pushed the door open. The casual conversation died instantly. Jessica suddenly became fascinated with her coffee cup, while Brenda found something deeply interesting about the floor tiles. Catherine walked directly to the table. "Bed 6 potassium has dropped to critical levels," she said evenly, placing the chart in front of Jessica. "I've already requested replacement from pharmacy. I need your authorization for continuous cardiac monitoring." Jessica forced an irritated smile. "I was getting to that. I'm sure you were." The silence that followed was almost painful. "I'm simply trying to keep the patient alive," Catherine added before turning and leaving the room. No anger, no sarcasm, just facts that somehow stung even more. Weeks passed and little changed. Catherine always ate lunch alone on the hospital rooftop, overlooking Baltimore's skyline. She volunteered for the assignments everyone else quietly avoided: violent assault victims, infectious disease cases, terminal patients with no remaining family, and trauma survivors whose injuries made other nurses uncomfortable. She never complained. She never asked for recognition. She simply worked. Meanwhile, rumors multiplied. Someone claimed she'd caused a drunk driving accident that left her burned beyond recognition. Another insisted the scars came from an abusive marriage. Brenda confidently announced that her cousin in human resources had seen Catherine's employment file. "It's almost completely redacted," she whispered dramatically. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "So what are they hiding?" "I heard something about an explosion. Maybe a meth lab." The rumor spread through the ICU before the afternoon shift even began. Catherine heard pieces of it throughout the day. She corrected none of them. The truth was infinitely stranger. Everything changed on a stormy Tuesday afternoon. Rain hammered against the ICU windows as trauma alarms echoed through the department. "Motorcycle collision," someone shouted. The patient arrived seconds later. 30 years old. Massive internal bleeding. Multiple fractures. Blood covered the stretcher. "Pressure's crashing," a resident yelled. Dr. Samuel Abbott strode into the room, immediately taking command. "Start compressions." His gloves were already soaked crimson as he fought to control the hemorrhaging. "Where's my fluid bolus?" he barked. Jessica fumbled within 4 lines. The vein collapsed. Then find another. I can't. Every second mattered. The cardiac monitor screamed. The patient's pulse weakened. Chaos swallowed the room. Then Catherine walked in. She took exactly one glance around the room. 1 second. That was all she needed. Without asking permission, she crossed to the crash cart and removed an intraosseous drill. Dr. Abbott looked up sharply. What are you doing? Catherine ignored him. She knelt beside the patient. Hold his leg. Jessica blinked. What? Hold. His leg. It wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It was the unmistakable voice of someone accustomed to giving orders while lives hung in the balance. Jessica obeyed before realizing she'd never been given a choice. Catherine positioned the drill against the patient's upper tibia. The room watched. With one swift, practiced motion, the needle drove directly through the outer layer of bone into the marrow cavity. The sound lasted barely a second. Line established, Catherine said calmly. She connected the tubing. Push fluids. Within moments, life-saving fluids rushed directly into the patient's circulation. The blood pressure monitor climbed. 48/20, then 55, 63. The cardiac rhythm stabilized. The frantic beeping slowed. The room exhaled. Dr. Abbott stared at the monitor before slowly turning toward Catherine. Where, he asked quietly, did you learn to place an IO line that fast? Catherine removed her gloves without looking at him. Some jobs, she replied. Don't allow a second attempt. Then she walked out of the trauma bay, leaving behind a room full of stunned doctors and nurses who, for the first time since she'd arrived, realized the quiet woman covered in scars might be carrying a past none of them could begin to imagine. The shrill scream of the flatline monitor suddenly broke into a steady, rhythmic beep. The patient had a pulse. A collective breath escaped the trauma team. Dr. Samuel Abbott stepped away from the bed, chest rising and falling as he wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. His gloves were soaked in blood, and exhaustion showed on his face. But relief lasted only a moment. His eyes locked onto Catherine Hayes. Instead of gratitude, anger burned in his expression. Her intervention had saved the patient and exposed how badly he had lost control of his own trauma room. Men like Samuel Abbott valued authority above all else. Being outperformed by a nurse was something he could neither ignore nor forgive. He ripped off his gloves and threw them into the trash. Don't ever step into one of my codes and take over again, Hayes, he snapped. You're not some cowboy riding in to save the day. The room fell silent. You are a nurse, Abbott continued, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. Know your place. Catherine met his glare without the slightest hint of fear. Her expression remained perfectly calm. My place, she said quietly, is keeping the patient breathing. She glanced toward the stabilized monitor. He still is. Without another word, she removed her gloves, disposed of them neatly, and walked out of the trauma bay. Abbott stood speechless, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles twitched beneath his skin. By the end of the shift, Jessica Reynolds had filed a formal complaint. The report accused Catherine of insubordination, reckless conduct, and creating a hostile work environment by overriding a physician's authority. Hospital administration never bothered asking for Catherine's side of the story. Abbott's reputation carried more weight than hers. She was placed on probation. One more incident, they warned, and her employment would be terminated immediately. The gossip spread through Ward 4 before sunrise. This is what happens when people forget their place, Jessica remarked smugly. Brenda nodded in agreement. She'll be gone within a week. Neither woman noticed Catherine quietly walking past the nurse's station carrying fresh patient charts. She neither defended herself nor acknowledged the whispers. She simply kept working. The bullies believed they had won. They had no idea how quickly everything was about to change. It happened the following Friday evening. Shift change had just begun, and the ICU had settled into its brief window of calm. Then the building trembled. A deafening roar echoed overhead. Every nurse looked toward the ceiling as twin military helicopters descended onto the hospital rooftop. The glass windows rattled violently. Coffee cups vibrated across the nurse's station. What in the world? Brenda whispered. Before anyone could answer, the ICU doors burst open. A wave of black-clad men surged inside. Some wore tailored dark suits. Others wore tactical body armor beneath black jackets. Every one of them moved with practiced precision. "Clear the corridor," one agent shouted. "This floor is now under federal authority." Several agents immediately began escorting staff away from the treatment rooms, while others secured every entrance. Hospital employees found themselves pressed against the walls before they fully understood what was happening. Jessica attempted to protest. "You can't just storm into, ma'am." An agent with a scar running beneath his right eye stepped directly in front of her. "Step back against the wall." His hand rested calmly on the grip of his holstered sidearm. "Or you'll be detained." Jessica's face drained of color. Without another word, she obeyed. Moments later, a stretcher burst through the entrance at a full sprint. It was surrounded on every side by armed security personnel. The patient lying on it appeared to be in his late 60s. His expensive charcoal suit had been cut apart. Blood soaked the remaining fabric across his chest. His skin had turned an alarming shade of gray. "We have a code black," the lead agent shouted. "I need your best trauma physician now." Dr. Abbott hurried forward, his confidence noticeably shaken. "I'm the attending physician," he said. "Take him to Trauma Bay 1. The gurney disappeared into the room, federal agents forming a tight protective ring around it. Abbott connected monitors while Jessica struggled to prepare emergency medications. "What happened?" Abbott demanded. The lead agent answered without emotion. "Classified. I can't treat him without knowing the mechanism of injury. He sustained 2 gunshot wounds to the chest. External bleeding has been controlled." The agent's voice hardened. Minutes ago he began seizing. His blood pressure collapsed. The cardiac monitor suddenly erupted with rapid alarms. Jessica stared at the screen. "Doctor, ventricular tachycardia." Abbott's composure vanished. "Epinephrine. Charge the defibrillator. Prepare to shock." "No." The single word sliced through the room. Every head turned. Catherine Hayes stepped through the wall of federal agents with complete confidence. One of the suited operatives reached for her shoulder to force her back. Before his hand fully closed, Catherine moved, fast enough that none of the medical staff even saw how. The suited agent lunged forward, grabbing Catherine Hayes by the shoulder. "Step away from the patient." She never threw a punch. Instead, she shifted her weight, rotated her hips, and rolled her shoulder in one fluid motion. The man's grip broke instantly. Before he realized what had happened, he had stumbled backward 2 steps, staring at his empty hand in disbelief. It hadn't looked like strength. It had looked like training. Catherine didn't acknowledge him again. She moved to the bedside, her attention fixed entirely on the patient. His breathing was shallow. His pulse was racing. The 2 gunshot wounds had been expertly packed, but something about them immediately caught her eye. Dark discoloration radiated outward from the entry wounds in thin branching lines that looked wrong, far too aggressive for ordinary tissue damage. She leaned closer. A faint, bitter scent reached her. Almonds. Her expression hardened. Dr. Abbott pointed toward the door. "Hayes, get away from that patient." "Security." Catherine ignored him completely. She turned toward the lead federal agent. "The bullets were coded," she said calmly. The room froze. "This isn't ordinary blood loss. He's showing signs of hemotoxic shock, combined with a synthetic neurotoxin." Abbott scoffed. "That's absurd. If you administer epinephrine," Catherine continued without looking at him, "you'll accelerate the toxin circulation. It will bind to the cardiac tissue. His heart won't fail gradually." She met the agent's eyes. "It will tear itself apart." Silence swallowed the trauma bay. The lead agent's face drained of color. "How do you know that?" Catherine answered without hesitation. "Because I've treated it before." Her voice became quieter. "Damascus." The single word landed like an explosion. The agent stared at her. Then he snapped toward Dr. Abbott. "Stand down." Abbott blinked. "What?" "You heard me." The agent's voice became steel. "Let her work." Abbott threw his hands into the air. "Have you lost your mind?" "She's a probationary nurse." "I'm the attending PHY," I said. "Step away." The agent drew his sidearm in one smooth motion. He didn't aim it at anyone. He pointed it toward the floor. He didn't need to say another word. The message was unmistakable. Abbott immediately retreated. Jessica followed, trembling. Catherine took control of the room. The quiet nurse everyone mocked seemed to disappear. In her place stood someone who issued commands with absolute certainty. Jessica. No response. Jessica stood frozen. Atropine. Pralidoxime. 3 amps of sodium bicarbonate. Jessica's lips trembled. I don't know where. Move. Catherine brushed past her and pulled open the crash cart herself. Drawer after drawer opened with practiced speed. Her hands never hesitated. She located each medication within seconds, drew the syringes, checked the doses, and injected them into the patient's central line with flawless precision. Every movement looked rehearsed. Years of repetition compressed into seconds. She leaned close to the unconscious man's ear. "Come on," she whispered. "You survived a coup in Bogota." Her hand steadied the oxygen mask. "You're not dying on my table." She reached for the defibrillator paddles. Charging. 200 joules. The machine whined. Clear. The patient's body lifted violently from the mattress. The monitor continued screaming. No rhythm. Recharge. 300. Again she placed the paddles. Clear. Another powerful shock rippled through the body. Then nothing. The room became painfully silent. Jessica covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Abbott lowered his eyes, already imagining the investigation that would follow. Even the federal agents stood motionless. 10 endless seconds passed. Then beep. A single heartbeat. Another. Then another. A steady rhythm appeared across the monitor. Color slowly returned to the patient's face as blood pressure climbed. The gray hue faded. His breathing deepened. Catherine released a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She carefully set the paddles aside, adjusted the 4 infusion, and checked the monitor one final time. "He's stable," she said quietly. "The toxin is breaking down, but he needs immediate filtration bypass surgery. Move him now." No one moved. The entire trauma base stared at her. Dr. Abbott looked as though he had forgotten how to speak. Jessica remained frozen beside the crash cart. Only minutes earlier, they had dismissed Catherine Hayes as a scarred nurse who didn't know her place. Now she had identified a weapon none of them recognized, countered its effects, and saved a man every monitor in the room had declared beyond hope. The lead federal agent walked slowly toward her. His eyes lingered on the burned scars climbing her neck before settling on the name stitched above her pocket. Catherine Hayes. Recognition flickered across his face. Not curiosity. Recognition. The suited agent slowly removed his earpiece. Only moments earlier, he had been prepared to drag Catherine Hayes out of the trauma bay by force. Now his entire posture changed. His shoulders straightened. His chin lifted. Every trace of aggression disappeared, replaced by unmistakable respect. He came to attention. "I didn't recognize you without the uniform, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice carrying the slightest tremor. "It's an honor to see you again." The room fell silent. Jessica stared at the agent in disbelief. Federal agents didn't stand at attention for nurses. Before Catherine could answer, the ICU doors opened once more. This time, no one shouted. No one needed to. A man in a perfectly tailored midnight blue suit walked into Trauma Bay 1 with calm, measured confidence. Jonathan Croft. At 58 years old, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency carried himself with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to making decisions that never appeared in history books. His silver hair was immaculate despite the emergency, and 4 heavily armed members of his protective detail followed several paces behind. Croft's eyes swept across the room. He noted the blood pooling beneath the operating table, the shredded remains of the patient's expensive charcoal suit, Dr. Samuel Abbott standing rigid with blood still staining his scrubs, Jessica Reynolds trembling against the wall. Then his gaze settled on the lone nurse calmly adjusting N4 pump. He stopped walking. For the first time anyone present had ever seen, the CIA director looked genuinely stunned. "My God." The words escaped as little more than a whisper. He stepped past his own security detail without hesitation. "Captain Hayes." Catherine turned from the monitor. She neither saluted nor stiffened. Instead, she offered a small professional nod. "Director Croft." A faint smile touched her scarred face. It's been a while. Her eyes briefly studied him. You look older. Croft laughed softly. The sound carried equal parts relief and disbelief. And you still haven't lost your sense of humor. He shook his head. You disappeared 3 years ago. His expression softened. We searched every contact, every safe house, every medical network we had. We thought you wanted nothing more to do with us. I wanted a quieter life, Catherine answered simply. For several seconds, neither spoke. It was the silence of two people who had survived the same impossible world. Dr. Abbott finally found his voice. He stepped forward cautiously. Director, sir. His words shook. I don't understand. He pointed toward Catherine. She's one of our trauma nurses. She's currently on disciplinary probation for insubordination. He swallowed. She overruled my medical orders, assaulted one of your agents, and administered medications without my authorization. Croft slowly turned. The warmth vanished from his face. His eyes settled on Abbott with such cold intensity that the room seemed to lose 10 degrees. A trauma nurse. He repeated the words slowly. On probation. His gaze shifted briefly toward Jessica before returning to Abbott. You placed Captain Catherine Hayes on disciplinary probation. Neither doctor answered. Croft exhaled through his nose. You have absolutely no idea who has been working in your hospital. Jessica's voice barely rose above a whisper. Captain. Croft looked around the room. I suppose introductions are overdue. He took one deliberate step toward Abbott. The woman standing behind you is Captain Catherine Hayes. His voice echoed through the silent trauma bay. Former Joint Special Operations Command combat medic. Later recruited into the Central Intelligence Agency's Special Activities Center. The finest operational medical officer I have ever had the privilege to command. Several federal agents instinctively lowered their eyes. None questioned the statement. Among intelligence personnel, Catherine Hayes was more legend than person. Croft continued. 3 years ago, our Damascus extraction mission collapsed. Our safe house was compromised by insurgents armed with chemical weapons and thermobaric explosives. A heavy silence settled over the room. Even the agents shifted uneasily. Every operative in Langley knew the story. Few knew the woman who had lived it. A thermobaric grenade breached the surgical room where Captain Hayes was treating a critically wounded intelligence asset. Croft's normally composed voice thickened. She had every opportunity to save herself. But she didn't move. He looked directly at Jessica. She threw herself across the operating table. She used her own body as a shield to protect an unconscious patient and 2 wounded operators. The blast fused burning fragments of her tactical equipment into her skin. It burned her neck. It burned her arm. It left injuries military physicians believed were unsurvivable. Jessica slowly looked toward the scars climbing Catherine's neck. They no longer seemed ugly. They looked earned. Croft continued quietly. Most people would have died where they fell. Captain Hayes regained consciousness minutes later. Despite catastrophic burns, severe blood loss, and chemical exposure, she armed herself, secured the perimeter, and continued treating casualties. He paused. For nearly an hour, she kept every wounded operator alive until the extraction team finally reached the compound. No one spoke. Jessica felt her stomach twist. Those scars, she remembered laughing about them, calling them frightening, suggesting patients shouldn't have to look at them. Each mark represented a life Catherine had chosen to save instead of herself. Shame flooded through her, so suddenly she thought she might collapse. Dr. Abbott remained frozen where he stood. Every assumption he had made about Catherine Hayes had just been shattered. The quiet nurse he had publicly humiliated had once walked through fire, survived a battlefield no ordinary medic could have endured, and saved lives under conditions he could scarcely imagine. Dr. Abbott could not speak. His jaw moved soundlessly as he stared at Catherine Hayes, the quiet nurse he had belittled for weeks. Every sarcastic remark, every public reprimand, every assumption he had made about her collapsed beneath the weight of the truth. Director Jonathan Croft stepped to the bedside and looked down at the recovering patient. The monitors now displayed a strong, steady rhythm. The man lying on this table, Croft said quietly, is William Harrison. The name meant nothing to the hospital staff. It meant everything to the agents. He is one of the United States' most valuable diplomatic intelligence assets. Croft glanced toward Catherine. He is also the same man Captain Hayes protected in Damascus. Silence filled the room. If Mr. Harrison had died tonight, Croft continued, years of sensitive diplomatic negotiations could have unraveled before sunrise. He looked back at Catherine, gratitude plainly visible in his expression. You saved him twice. Catherine barely acknowledged the praise. Her attention remained on the patient's monitors. The toxin was a modified nerve agent compound combined with a fast-acting blood poison, she reported in the calm, detached tone of someone giving an operational briefing. The attackers used a subdermal dispersal projectile. She adjusted in 4 infusion. If epinephrine had been administered as originally ordered, the increased circulation would have accelerated systemic distribution. She paused. The patient would not have survived. Croft slowly turned toward Dr. Abbott. The surgeon instinctively took half a step backward. So let me be absolutely clear. Croft's voice was controlled, but every word landed with surgical precision. My operative did not assault a federal agent. She prevented one from interfering with life-saving treatment. He took another step. She did not violate medical protocol. She overrode a dangerous decision that would have killed a protected United States intelligence asset. The room remained perfectly still. Agent Miller, the lead tactical agent, immediately stood straighter. Sir, escort Dr. Abbott from this trauma bay. Abbott's eyes widened. What? Until this incident has been fully reviewed, he is to be separated from this operation. Abbott's face turned pale. You can't be serious. Croft never raised his voice. When mistakes place national security at risk, every possibility must be examined. Abbott's composure finally shattered. I'm chief of trauma. You don't have the authority to. 2 federal agents gently but firmly took hold of his arms. Director, this is ridiculous. His protest echoed through the hallway as he was escorted away. Within moments, his voice disappeared. Jessica Reynolds stood alone beside the wall. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. Mascara streaked her cheeks. She couldn't bring herself to meet Catherine's eyes. Croft looked toward Catherine. Captain Hayes. My medical response team is 26 minutes away. Until they arrive, I want you coordinating this patient's care. Whatever equipment you require will be provided. If anyone obstructs you, my personnel will handle it. Catherine nodded once. Understood. Only then did she turn toward Jessica. The younger nurse immediately began crying. I'm so sorry. Her words came between sobs. I judged you. I treated you terribly. I didn't know. For several long seconds, Catherine simply looked at her. Everyone waited. No one knew what she would say. Finally, Catherine spoke. Jessica. Yes. You're a trauma nurse. Jessica nodded weakly. Then stopped crying. The words were firm but not cruel. Your patients don't need your guilt. They need your hands. Jessica quickly wiped her face. I need 6 units of O-negative blood. Catherine continued without hesitation. 4 units of fresh frozen plasma. 2 units of platelets. Call the blood bank. Tell them it's an emergency. Jessica straightened instinctively. Yes, Captain. She caught herself. I mean, Catherine. Without another word, she ran from the room. The next several hours became a blur of controlled urgency. Under Catherine's direction, physicians, nurses, and the CIA's medical specialists worked as a single coordinated team. Advanced filtration equipment was brought from another surgical department to remove the remaining toxin from William Harrison's bloodstream. Every instruction Catherine gave was calm, clear, precise. No movement was wasted. No order needed repeating. Even the agency's elite physicians quietly deferred to her experience. Beneath the brilliant operating lights, the burn scars winding across her neck and arm no longer drew uncomfortable stares. They had become visible reminders of extraordinary sacrifice. As dawn approached, the final laboratory results returned. The toxin had been successfully eliminated. William Harrison's condition was stable. For the first time in hours, the operating room relaxed. The patient was transferred to a secure recovery suite on the hospital's 7th floor, where federal agents established a tightly guarded perimeter. Downstairs, another battle was beginning. Inside the executive offices of Johns Hopkins Hospital, Chief Executive Officer Robert Sinclair sat rigidly behind his massive mahogany desk. The air conditioning was running, yet sweat beaded across his forehead. Director Jonathan Croft sat opposite him. Federal attorneys occupied one side of the conference table. Armed protective agents stood silently along the walls. Between them rested a single personnel file. It contained Catherine Hayes' employment records, performance evaluations, internal complaints, and, sitting prominently on top, the disciplinary probation notice that hospital leadership had approved without ever learning who she truly was. Croft rested one hand on the folder. His expression was unreadable. Then, without saying a word, he slowly opened it. The thick personnel file lay open across the polished mahogany desk. Inside were Catherine Hayes' performance reviews, patient commendations, disciplinary reports, and the probation notice signed by Dr. Samuel Abbott and countersigned by senior nursing staff. Director Jonathan Croft rested one hand on the folder without looking up. Across from him, Johns Hopkins Hospital CEO Robert Sinclair sat rigid in his leather chair, nervously dabbing his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "I am completely appalled," Director Croft, Sinclair said. "Please believe me, this hospital does not tolerate workplace harassment or bullying. Had we known Captain Hayes' background, none of this would have happened." Croft slowly lifted his eyes. "If you had known who she was," he replied evenly, "you would have respected her." The room fell silent. "But that isn't what concerns me." His voice remained calm, which somehow made it even more intimidating. "The true measure of character is how people treat someone when they believe that person has no power." He closed the file. "Your employees believe Catherine Hayes was simply a scarred nurse with no one to defend her. They mocked her. They isolated her. They questioned her competence. And when she saved a patient's life, they punished her for it." Sinclair lowered his eyes. "I accept responsibility. Dr. Samuel Abbott's employment has already been terminated. The medical board has been notified to conduct a full review of his conduct." He swallowed hard. Nurse Jessica Reynolds has been removed from her supervisory role and placed on administrative leave pending disciplinary proceedings. Croft remained expressionless. "And Captain Hayes?" Sinclair straightened. "We intend to offer her the position of floor supervisor with a substantial salary increase, and you will offer her whatever she asks for," Croft interrupted. The CEO stopped speaking. "You will ensure she never again works in an environment poisoned by petty politics and professional jealousy." Croft leaned forward slightly. "Because your institution nearly drove away one of the finest medical professionals this country has ever produced." Hours later, the first rays of morning sunlight spilled through the windows of the ICU break room. For the first time since the previous evening, the hospital had grown quiet. Catherine sat alone at a small table, a plain cup of black coffee warming her hands. Adrenaline had faded. Now came the familiar ache. The burns across her neck felt tight. The old grafts along her arm throbbed with the phantom pain that never completely disappeared. She accepted it the way she accepted breathing. The door opened softly. Director Croft entered without his security detail. He looked far older than he had only a few hours earlier. He pulled out a chair and sat opposite her. "The filtration worked," he said. "William stable." Catherine nodded. "He should regain consciousness sometime this morning." Croft smiled faintly. "The first thing he'll do is ask for you." She allowed herself the smallest smile. "Tell him we're even." For a moment neither spoke. Then Croft leaned forward. "Catherine, we need you back." She already knew what was coming. "I can reinstate your clearance today. You could return as Chief Medical Director for the Special Activities Center. You'd never have to hide who you are again. You'd work alongside people who understand exactly what those scars cost." Catherine looked down at the pale, grafted skin covering her forearm. For 3 years, she had hidden inside civilian life. Not because she feared the world, because she blamed herself for the people she couldn't save. Every scar reminded her of Damascus. Every morning reminded her she had survived when others hadn't. She slowly raised her eyes. "My scars aren't a secret anymore, Jonathan. Neither am I," Croft waited. "But I'm not coming back." He frowned. "After everything that's happened here?" Catherine looked toward the ICU through the break room window. Nurses hurried between rooms. Families waited beside hospital beds. Monitors continued their endless chorus of beeps. "Out there," she said quietly, "I kept soldiers alive so they could return to battle." She paused. "Here, I keep people alive so they can return home." The grandmother with heart failure. The teenager injured in a car crash. The exhausted father recovering from emergency surgery. They don't care about classified operations. They don't know what happened in Damascus. They just need someone who refuses to give up when everyone else thinks it's over. She wrapped both hands around her coffee. "This is my mission now. I'm not leaving because a few insecure people tried to make me feel unwelcome. If I walk away, they win." Croft studied her for several long moments. Slowly, disappointment gave way to admiration. He stood. Without a word, he raised his hand in a crisp salute. It was an honor rarely offered by a director to a former operative. "The agency owes you more than it can ever repay, Captain Hayes. If you ever need us." He smiled. "You already know how to find me." Catherine returned a small nod. "Thank you, Director." Croft turned and quietly left the room. Minutes later, the hospital came alive as the morning shift arrived. Word of the previous night's events had spread through every department. The whispers hadn't disappeared. They had simply changed. As Catherine walked through ward for carrying a fresh patient chart, conversation stopped. Doctors stepped respectfully aside to clear the hallway. Nurses greeted her with quiet nods instead of suspicious glances. Brenda froze near the medication cart. She stared at the scars climbing Catherine's neck. The same scars she had mocked only days before. Now they no longer seemed frightening. They looked like symbols of extraordinary courage. Catherine kept walking. She didn't need apologies. She didn't want admiration. She certainly didn't need anyone's fear. Respect meant little if it depended on secret titles and heroic stories. What mattered was how people treated those they believed were ordinary. She reached the nurse's station, picked up the next patient file, clicked her pen, and reviewed the morning assignments. Another patient needed medication. Another family needed reassurance. Another life depended on calm hands and steady judgment. That was enough. Catherine Hayes wasn't defined by the scars she carried or the medals she never displayed. She was defined by the choice she made every day. To keep showing up, to keep fighting for strangers, and to keep saving lives when it mattered most. And no one in that hospital would ever look at her scars the same way again.